My name is Craig Springer. I lead Alpha in the U.S., and we create spaces for conversation for people to explore life, God, the basics of the Christian faith within the context of local churches. It's basically a series of courses with food, talk, discussion, where people find belonging and their walls to the gospel come down over time and they experience the presence of God. I discovered it as a pastor, realizing culture shifting. 59% of millennials are leaving church by age 30. And a lot of the solutions that we bring as pastors are, pour more money into the weekend program, get people to raise their hands, or pour more training into individual evangelists in churches. And there's a lot of problems with that as the hunger in millennials or Gen Z is growing and there's more hostility even to the gospel. Where do people go when they have questions in our churches? We're great at proclamation, but culture is asking for conversation. And so we're creating spaces for conversation. And then it's very hard when you're just training up a congregation to share Christ, to go from drinking a beer on the front lawn or hanging out, talking about sports, to then transitioning to the substitutionary atonement. And you really need a space for people to process out their thoughts, their point of view, and just being heard. I think of Jason, who is a police officer in rural Colorado, which is where the Batman premiere massacre occurred. And he walked into the theater, first responder, ended up holding people as they were bleeding out. And then he tells me, and I've walked into homes where I'm holding an abusive father away from his kids, looking him in the eyes. And Jason's wife, Ashley, wasn't a Christian, but she heard about Alpha. And she told Jason, "You're going to Alpha." And he came and sat in our groups. And it's a 10-week process. And part of what we do is we listen. We don't answer questions. So we're not bashing people's point of view. We also don't force people to share. And so the first 4 weeks, Jason's just sitting there like, and I'm thinking week 2, he's going to talk. He's going to do something. And he just sits there. Week 3, nothing. Week 4, he finally says, "Listen, I know a lot of you here are asking, is God real? But when you've held someone when they're bleeding out and you've looked kids in the eyes and you know they didn't deserve this, there's no God." He said, "I have a concrete wall that I have allowed to form around my heart." And that's it. And no one, because of Alpha, we just listened. No one said, God works for the good of those who love him or are called according to his purpose. It's like, all we said was, wow, thanks for sharing that. Like, can anyone else relate? Just, again, it's creating a disarming container for him to explore. And part of Alpha is a weekend, kind of a prayer experience. And so Jason came on it, and we just taught him to say, "Listen, I know you don't believe in God, but just try this. Just say, 'God, I'm open, come Holy Spirit.'" And Jason said, "Okay, whatever, come Holy Spirit." And he sat there for 3 minutes and waited. And within about 3 minutes, he just started weeping and just, snot coming out. And volunteers came around and prayed for him. And 10 minutes later, everybody said, "What happened, Jason?" He said, "I have no idea, but I literally felt stone shatter around my heart, love being poured in like I've ever known, and I love Jesus." And he was baptized. And we say, the gospel is not the arguments of men. It's not the strategies of the church. The gospel is the power of God for the salvation of those who believe. And so we're just trying to create a container where any hostility, any barriers to the gospel are removed through welcome and listening and love, and God's using it. David Augsburger writes that being listened to is so close to being loved that the average person cannot tell the difference. And I think giving people the generosity of hearing their point of view, when you're a Christian and they're a non-Christian, is a generous act. It allows them to be welcomed even if you think differently than them. And it's amazing at the power of listening. And that's kind of the primary training component of Alpha, is these are groups that will listen to you, not tell you what you should think. People are surprised by it. Like, I thought I was going to come to the church. I mean, yeah, we have a film series where we teach the truth, but I thought I was going to come to the church and they were going to correct me. But instead they listened. And over time, people feel loved in that. And over time, people realize even how some of their point of view is missing grace or missing love themselves, and they're transformed. So I'm going to give the gift of listening to people. Alpha started in central London, where really the church is and was dying, kind of this post-Christian context. And so we're discovering what's working in a post-Christian context. So we have 25 million people go through it globally. And now that the States is kind of heading into that cultural moment, we are seeing this shift in evangelism that's working in post-Christian context. It's moving from proclamation to conversation. It's, yeah, we're going to proclaim the gospel on the weekend, and yes, God is using that, but until we're creating a space for conversation, we're not going to meet culture in its place of need. And then the other is moving from explanation to experience. Is people hunger not for information about God, or apologetic about God. People want to have an experience of God. And so until we create spaces of conversation and experience, I think we're going to miss the cultural shifts. And so that's what we're trying to do in Alpha. And all of our stuff is online, alphausa.org. We are seeing a movement in the U.S. Approximately 350,000 people go through Alpha this year. And one of the unknown things about Alpha is the platform of unity that it creates in a city or among maybe places of historical divide. So of that 350, about 100,000 of those are Catholics. We're seeing this just massive wave of openness to the gospel through this tool that came out of an Anglican church, within the Catholic Church, within the Pentecostal Church, within the Episcopal Church, within the Baptist churches. And so it kind of takes away the barrier of disunity that people don't appreciate, who aren't following Jesus. So it's not only ineffective, it's arrogant and it's not loving to think, I have the solution, I'm going to force it upon you. The reality is that God has put eternity in the hearts of every single person. We see that in Ecclesiastes. He's stamped his image on everyone. And what if our role is to draw out the person that God created, the work that God's already doing in someone, through listening, through friendship, as opposed to sort of hammer in what we think, the hard truths that are missing in someone's life. And so if we approach someone in that sense, then we're meeting God where he's already working. And it feels like love, because it is. And that, I think, is the most transformative way we can build friendship with people. I was excited about Alpha as a pastor. I went to Central London asking the question, God, where are you working in a truly secular society? Like, what's going to be the mechanism that you reach the next 2 generations through? And I saw, 920 and 30-something standing in line in the rain, in the dark, in downtown London, waiting to investigate Jesus through Alpha. And I had to understand, what is God doing here? And we've been able to learn through friendship with Barna the impact of Alpha. 25 million people globally. We found that 82% of those who start and complete Alpha end up in a relationship with Jesus by the end of the course. And I saw this and I'm thinking, this is like revival level spiritual fruit. I want to be a part of this. And so we started plugging into our church and started seeing dramatic change in evangelism and people coming to Jesus.